Give me a sense here in terms of the short-term impact on energy, the energy complex, and whether there is going to be a long-term impact from these events.
Well, the short-term impact is really pronounced in terms of lost capacity from a refining perspective, which could take a long time to be restored. We're still not sure how long it will take to get the crude oil production back up and running. That could be a lot shorter. And then also the reduction in LNG exports. So globally, this is going to have huge implications for prices for commodities and particularly for refined products in the short term. In the long term, as we move more to decarbonize our economy and have more reliance on the grid as we all move toward electrification, that's going to cause some real questions in terms of the resiliency of the grid and how we have enough redundancy so that issues like this don't happen again in extreme weather.
Yeah, one can only imagine when we have so much more demand, given everybody plugging in their car, not to mention their phones and all their devices, but their car, what that's going to mean. But how long is short term here when you talk about the impact on refining, for example, and prices of some of these underlying fuels? How long are we talking?
Well, the interesting thing is that this event is also coinciding with the markets and the economies opening up post-COVID as the vaccine is now more in place. And so as we start to think about going into the summer driving season in the U.S., we could be looking at higher gasoline prices now for quite a bit of time as a result of this. When we see in terms of this past week that the height of refining capacity that was taken offline, it was more than double what we saw in Hurricane Harvey. And that also took several weeks, if not longer, to get fully restored after that event.
Tamar, Journal had a piece yesterday on the Saudis getting more confident in the oil price recovery and potentially opening the door to reversing some of those cuts later in the year. Are they over their skis, or is that pretty much given assuming the path of the economic reopening we've been talking about?
I think that's pretty much a given. I mean, I think that the U.S. producer discipline thesis remains intact insofar as oil prices in the U.S. remain in the 50s, even in the high 50s. But once you start heading into $60 a barrel territory, I think some of that goes out the window. And I think Saudi knows that. We've seen that in the past, that $60 is sort of that magic number in the U.S. that incentivizes too much production relative to the level of global demand growth, particularly as the world economy is still a little bit fragile. So I do think that Saudi Arabia and others will more likely put more production out in the markets in the coming months.
Tamar, you mentioned the electric grid and our ability to actually make it more resilient in the face of what may be a lot more demand on it. How concerned are you about that? And are we in a position to actually start to really do something about it?
Well, I hope that the situation in Texas serves as a wake-up call for the need to have greater redundancy and resilience in the grid. And there are a number of things that could be done in terms of weatherizing the infrastructure. But I think that the key thing is that we have to look at what we're investing in for our baseload demand. That's the source of supply that powers the grid at all times. And then you've got the incremental sources for the peak periods. We've been, over time, in Texas in particular, has been investing less in nuclear and coal for baseload and going more toward renewables. And so renewables are fine for the other periods of time, but because they are so exposed to the elements, they don't work as well for base demand. So as we start to think about relying on the grid more for electric vehicles, as you mentioned, David, I do think that we have to think about what are the better sources of fuel for base load that don't require as much infrastructure, that can rely more on on-site fuel so that they're not subject to extreme weather events.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.